The Sound of Music looks like pure Hollywood magic, but behind those sunlit hills lies a darker story. Julie Andrews battered by helicopter blades, a drowning child pulled from a lake, and a leading man who despised every moment on set. This wasn't just another musical. It was survival wrapped in songs, a studio gambling its last dollar, and a film that almost never happened. These 20 facts reveal the chaos behind cinema's most beloved fairy tale. That iconic opening shot of Maria twirling on the mountaintop looks like freedom captured on film, but for Julie Andrews, it was pure torture. The Austrian meadow was cold, rain-slicked, and circling overhead was a helicopter carrying the camera crew. Every time it swooped low for the perfect angle, the rotor was blasted Andrews with such violent force that she was knocked flat into the grass. Take after take, she braced herself and tried to stay upright, only to be slammed down repeatedly. Andrews later joked that she ate more grass than she danced on it. What became cinema's most joyful image was actually a brutal battle between a determined actress and a merciless machine. However, this wasn't the only dangerous moment that nearly destroyed the production. The scene where the children tumble into the lake appears spontaneous and playful on screen, but behind the camera, it turned genuinely life-threatening. Kim Carath, the youngest cast member playing Little Gretel, couldn't swim at all. Julie Andrews was supposed to fall backward close enough to catch her safely, but instead toppled the wrong way, plunging too far to reach the terrified child. Panic erupted across the set as the 5-year-old began sinking, her heavy period costume dragging her under the water. Crew members dove in instantly, hauling her to safety while Andrews scrambled in shock. The shot stayed in the final cut, cleverly edited to look innocent and fun. For those who witnessed it, the moment became an unforgettable reminder that even joyful musicals carried real danger. "16 going on 17 plays like a perfect dream sequence, with Liesl twirling through the gazebo swept up in innocent first love. But the magic shattered violently on the very first take. Actress Charmian Carr leapt gracefully onto a wooden bench, slipped on the wet surface, and crashed straight through a pane of glass. The impact left her ankle badly sprained, swollen, and throbbing with pain. Production schedules couldn't accommodate delays, so Carr soldiered through with her leg tightly wrapped, bandages carefully hidden beneath her flowing gown. Every seemingly effortless step audiences see on screen was laced with genuine agony, her radiant smile masking the injury underneath. The number that captured youthful innocence and romance for millions was behind the scenes a triumph of sheer endurance. But the gazebo would betray the production again. The gazebo confession between Maria and Captain Von Trapp was meant to be pure cinematic romance, the moment their love finally blossomed. The music swelled perfectly, cameras rolled, and then the heavy lighting equipment betrayed everyone. The lamps above the set let out rude, sputtering raspberry noises every time they powered on, sounding exactly like flatulence. Julie Andrews collapsed into uncontrollable giggles, while Christopher Plummer tried and failed to maintain his character's gallant composure. Take after take fell apart as both leads dissolved into laughter, unable to deliver their romantic lines with straight faces. Director Robert Wise made a desperate choice: kill all the lights and film the entire scene in silhouette. The result became one of cinema's most iconic and tender love scenes. Its magic born not from careful planning but from laughter echoing through the night. Christopher Plummer may have played Captain Von Trapp with quiet dignity and restrained emotion, but behind the camera he genuinely loathed the sound of music. He openly sneered at it as the sound of mucus and complained bitterly that the sugary tone was suffocating his artistic soul. Filming in isolated Salzburg only deepened his misery, cut off from friends and drowning in endless retakes. He numbed himself nightly in local beer halls, trying desperately to forget the role that felt more like burden than triumph. Yet these contradictions somehow made his performance stronger. The captain's grief, a widower clinging to military discipline while raising children against tides of loss and war, touched something genuine in Plummer. When filming Edelweiss, he poured out all the melancholy he'd been carrying, and the crew watched him choke up during takes. But there was another humiliating secret about that iconic performance. Captain von Trapp's Edelweiss feels utterly heartfelt, a quiet anthem that seems to pour straight from Christopher Plummer's soul as he says goodbye to his beloved homeland. But the voice audiences heard in theaters wasn't actually his. Plummer recorded all the songs himself initially, only for producers to coldly decide his baritone wasn't strong enough for the soundtrack. They replaced it entirely with Bill Lee, a professional singer who specialized in dubbing Hollywood stars. For Plummer, it was deeply humiliating. He later admitted Lee sang better technically, but resented losing that crucial part of his performance. Still, the illusion worked flawlessly on screen. The captain's trembling voice carried the weight of a man watching his country fall to darkness. For millions of viewers, it remained Plummer's emotional moment, even though the sound came from someone else's throat. Yet Maria's casting nearly went to entirely different stars. Maria von Trapp wasn't always destined to be Julie Andrews. In early casting discussions, Hollywood aimed much higher up the glamour ladder, pursuing A-list stars. Doris Day was approached first, but she laughed off the idea immediately. "I'm not a nun," she quipped, refusing to trade her sultry image for a habit. Audrey Hepburn declined next, claiming she was simply too old for the role. Grace Kelly, now Princess of Monaco, was courted as well, but her royal duties barred her from returning to the screen. Through all these rejections, composer Richard Rodgers insisted Julie Andrews was perfect. Her voice had a clarity that felt born for Maria. But Fox executives weren't convinced, doubting her screen presence and worrying she was too prim, too tied to Mary Poppins. The Do-Re-Mi montage looks like pure sunshine and freedom, children dancing through Salzburg's picturesque landscapes with effortless joy. But filming it became absolute chaos. Sudden thunderstorms rolled viciously across the Austrian mountains, forcing the crew to stop mid-song repeatedly. Whole days were completely lost to downpours that soaked costumes and warped musical instruments beyond use. To finish the sequence, editors had to painstakingly stitch together footage shot weeks apart under wildly different conditions. In one cut, the sky beams brilliant blue. In the very next shot, storm clouds linger ominously overhead. Filming the Anschluss parade created genuine controversy that threatened to shut down production entirely. The crew hung massive swastika banners across Salzburg's historic district, and the effect was chillingly realistic. Too realistic. Local residents were horrified, and some even reported the film crew to authorities, believing something sinister was happening. To Austrians, the wounds of Nazi rule were still painfully raw, and seeing those flags waving again through their streets, even for a movie, was unbearable. City officials demanded extensive permits and much stricter oversight before allowing filming to continue. What was meant as simple set dressing had reopened scars that hadn't healed. On screen, the banners mark the Von Trapp's darkest hour. It's hard to imagine the sound of music as anything other than a sweeping fairy tale, but for a significant time it was headed towards something far darker and more brutal. Before Robert Wise took the director's chair, the project belonged to William Wyler, the Oscar-winning titan behind Ben-Hur. Wyler was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and his vision was shaped by painful memory rather than melody. He wanted more swastikas, more rallies, more scenes of Austria enthusiastically cheering the Anschluss. His Maria and von Trapps wouldn't have danced in sunlit gazebos. Wyler began scouting Salzburg locations, envisioning massive crowds saluting Hitler and streets lined with oppressive banners. His version would have leaned heavily into political reckoning, a stark reminder of how quickly innocence gets devoured by tyranny. But when Wyler left to direct The Collector, Fox handed the film to Robert Wise, who made a choice that changed cinema history. Audiences swooned over Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer's gazebo romance, but the real Maria von Trapp, she insisted emphatically she hadn't fallen in love with Georg first. Her heart belonged entirely to the children. "I really and truly was not in love," she admitted bluntly. "I loved the children, so in a way I really married the children." She also laughed at the idea of twirling in a moonlit gazebo, saying it never happened at all. Still, she praised Andrews' warmth and charm, proud that the actress carried her story to millions. Hollywood gave audiences 7 children, a stern father, and a governess who found love in a whirlwind of song. Deeply affectionate, and already adored by his children before Maria arrived. Maria didn't come to raise all 7 children, only to tutor one child recovering from illness. Their wedding wasn't a romantic rebellion against the Nazis. It happened 11 years before the Anschluss ever occurred. Most shocking of all, Maria openly confessed she hadn't loved Georg when she married him. Her devotion was entirely to the children, and love for their father developed only gradually over time. The truth was messy, imperfect, and deeply human. Yet perhaps that's precisely why the sanitized fairy tale endures so powerfully across generations. The Sound of Music wasn't just another Rodgers and Hammerstein triumph. It was their heartbreaking farewell. By the late 1950s, Oscar Hammerstein was dying of stomach cancer, and every lyric he wrote carried the unbearable weight of goodbye. His final gift was Edelweiss, a song so simple and hauntingly pure that audiences naturally assumed it was an authentic Austrian folk tune. In truth, it was Hammerstein's final lullaby, written while he knew his time was desperately short. He passed away in 1960, just months after the show's triumphant Broadway debut. For Richard Rodgers, it meant losing a lifelong creative partner. For audiences, it became a song that felt timeless, echoing across mountains and decades. In 1955, Maria von Trapp sold the complete rights to her family's memoir for a flat payment of $9,000. No royalties, no profit sharing, no claim whatsoever to what would come next. That single contract didn't just cover 2 modest German films, it opened the door to Broadway and eventually Hollywood's most financially successful musical. While The Sound of Music went on to gross hundreds of millions and rescue 20th Century Fox from complete financial collapse, the Von Trapps saw almost none of it. The family that inspired the beloved story became mere spectators to their own fortune. Maria later admitted she signed too quickly, eager just to see their story told on screen. In the end, the movie saved an entire studio from bankruptcy, but the real Von Trapps walked away with little more than memories. By 1963, 20th Century Fox was teetering on the edge of total collapse. The studio had recklessly poured its entire fortune into Cleopatra, a spectacle so bloated it nearly bankrupted them. Cost overruns, endless delays, and scandalous headlines about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton turned the movie into Hollywood's most expensive disaster. Then came a modest script about a governess, 7 children, and the power of song. Even Fox didn't expect much. Musicals were fading, and critics dismissed Rodgers and Hammerstein as old-fashioned. But when The Sound of Music hit theaters in 1965, it became an unstoppable phenomenon, eventually dethroning Gone with the Wind as the highest-grossing film ever. What Cleopatra nearly destroyed, The Sound of Music rebuilt. Yet one sequence proved unexpectedly difficult to film. The lonely goat herd may look like pure whimsy, Maria and the Von Trapp children giggling through a charming puppet show, but behind the curtain it was one of the film's toughest sequences. The marionettes were handcrafted by legendary puppeteers Bill and Cora Baird, each designed to yodel, dance, or leap perfectly in time with the music. It took 3 full weeks of intensive rehearsal for Julie Andrews and the young cast to master the complex strings, learning how to make wooden goats prance and tiny yodelers spin in perfect rhythm. Choreographers Mark Brough and Dee Dee Wood even staged a complete dance routine just for the puppets themselves. On screen, it appears effortless and spontaneous. Off-screen, it was precision, sweat, and strings that nearly stole the entire film. Years after The Sound of Music became a global phenomenon, Julie Andrews finally met her real-life counterpart on the Julie Andrews Hour. The stage lit up with 2 Marias face-to-face, Hollywood's governess and Austria's true matriarch standing together. The real Maria von Trapp praised Andrews warmly and graciously, but couldn't resist one playful jab about her yodeling technique. Without missing a beat, she demonstrated how it was really done in the Alps, leading them into an impromptu duet. The studio audience watched in awe as fact and fiction blurred beautifully, the nun and the actress harmonizing like old friends reunited. In that extraordinary moment, the fairy tale folded back on itself, proof that the Hills were still alive, not just on film, but in life itself. The music didn't stay trapped on screen where it belonged. When the Sound of Music soundtrack hit stores in 1965, it soared immediately to the top of the charts and never really left. It went platinum, selling millions of copies worldwide, and for decades remained one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. Do Re Mi became a playground chant across continents, while My Favorite Things slipped beyond the film entirely, showing up in commercials, Christmas playlists, and even rap songs. Generations learned those melodies long before they ever saw Julie Andrews twirl on a mountain. The movie was a massive hit, but the songs became genuinely eternal. Even today, just a few bars can summon not just nostalgia, but entire scenes playing vividly in memory. The Hills weren't the only things alive with music, so were living rooms everywhere. Yet Austria itself had a surprising reaction. You'd think Austria would have embraced The Sound of Music instantly. It was their mountains, their history, their story, after all. But when the film first arrived in Austrian theaters, the reception was surprisingly chilly. Local critics called it saccharine, too glossy, too sentimentally American. Some theaters even refused to screen it, deeply uneasy with a Hollywood fairy tale that softened the shadow of Nazi rule. For Austrians, those wounds were still painfully raw, and the Von Trapp's tale felt less like truth and more like an outsider's fantasy. But the rest of the world couldn't get enough. Tourists poured into Salzburg by the thousands, hunting for the gazebo, the abbey, the hills alive with music. What began as dismissal gradually turned into reluctant pride, a country eventually swept up by the very songs it once stubbornly resisted. The casting almost went in a completely different direction too. At first, the studio desperately wanted authenticity. The 7 Von Trapp children were almost played by real Austrian kids, plucked straight from local casting calls in Salzburg. But when producers listened carefully to the auditions, alarm bells rang immediately. The accents were thick and heavy, the delivery hard for American audiences to follow, and dubbing entire roles would bury the natural charm completely. So the ambitious plan was scrapped entirely. Instead, young actors from Hollywood and England were brought in. Some with voices strong enough for the demanding songs, others later dubbed by professionals. On screen, they looked like a perfect family, full of harmony and spirit. Off-screen, it was a patchwork solution born purely of necessity. What could have been a massive stumbling block turned into a triumph, because once cameras rolled, no one doubted those kids belonged in that house or in that story. For parents in the 1960s, The Sound of Music was a runaway hit. Families wore out VHS tapes, singing along in living rooms as if they were standing in the Salzburg hills themselves. School productions restaged the story year after year, with new generations eagerly stepping into the shoes of Maria or Liesl. Even decades later, kids who had never seen the Alps knew Do Re Mi by heart. The film stopped being just a movie and became a cultural inheritance, handed down like a lullaby from parent to child. Few films live this way, crossing time and generations with such ease. The Sound of Music didn't just echo in theaters. It planted itself in childhoods everywhere and grew with every voice that sang along. The Sound of Music wasn't supposed to be a miracle. It was battered by weather, mocked by its own star, and nearly sunk by studio doubts. Yet it soared, saving a studio, winning Oscars, and etching itself into history as one of cinema's most beloved films. Beyond the storms, accidents, and bitter jokes, it gave audiences something eternal, a story of music, love, and courage sung against the darkness of history. Keep watching Golden Frame for more deep dives into cinema's most fascinating stories.